Midweek Mediawatch, that's now, was Colin Peacock. Kia ora, good evening, Colin.
Hi, Karyn. I hope you don't give me the same intro you gave to that Mars rover audio. Don't expect too much.
Underwhelming.
Yeah, well, I wasn't that underwhelmed when you know it's coming from Mars or something. I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, it's incredible, really, isn't it? Just to know that it's been recorded on Sol 125, was it the day? In a Martian day. Yeah, Sol 215, got it backwards there.
Hey, speaking of things that aren't underwhelming, if I could just really briefly say, I happened to tune in last week when I wasn't on and heard your the night that it was announced Hamish Kilgour had died, and he'd loved the interview that you did and the fact you played one of my all-time favourite tunes, Born in the Wrong Time, from The Great Unwashed, which is great because throughout the day we had people dragging out the same old tracks from The Clean and that, and he did a lot more other stuff, and it was great to hear that and a lovely interview as well, so thank you for that.
Oh, thanks, Colin. Appreciate it. Let's start with, it's been a rocky week so far and day to day for the TVNZ RNZ merger.
Yes, more media merger manoeuvrings going on. So last week we heard the Prime Minister saying that they're going to rethink things over summer. She'll get her ministers to decide what's really important as they go into 2023. And she gave a round of sit-down interviews with political editors. And in one of them, she told, the Prime Minister told Newsroom's Joe Moyer, the merger is not our number one priority, so a bit of a signal there. And on RNZ's First Up show yesterday, Nicola Willis, National's deputy, came on the program and said she reckoned that was the death knell of the plan, that was it. So I guess we will see. But she did say some interesting things. Her leader, Christopher Luxon, had earlier said last week they would definitely unpick the merger, much more definitive way of speaking about it than he has previously. And in that First Up interview, I thought it was interesting. A couple of things. Nicola Willis is still using this figure of, she described it as $370 million of setup costs, and that really isn't what it is. There's $40 million in transition. The rest is operational funding. But she described it as an ideological project and actually said explicitly that she preferred TVNZ and RNZ to stay apart. She thought that was better for reasons of variety, plurality, and so on. And she also gave an interview, Nicola Willis, to Sean Plunkett on his outfit, The Platform, where she actually described the merger as crazy because there's a diminishing number of platforms for news. But I don't think that's quite right either. I think there's lots more outlets, like The Platform, for example, in startups in recent years. The problem is that they've all got declining audiences, revenues. Not many of them are really strong and powerful and effective, particularly in their difficult area of news. So it's kind of disappointing, I guess, to hear an opposition say that because, when they're in government, the same things will apply to them about the quality and presence of the media. So, yeah, a bit of a pity.
Well, Colin, RNZ and TVNZ managers appeared together to be grilled, supposedly, by MPs today at Parliament. Were they?
Not a whole lot. It was unusual in that the chairs and chief executives and a couple of other executives all appeared side by side. I think there were 6 of them together, which is odd because usually they have their own meetings, their own annual reviews in front of one of the parliamentary committees. And it's also odd because they've already had a review this year. It was right at the start of the year for the previous year. So I guess they had one this year because if it was literally a year later in February or late January next year, that's right up against the point where, unless things change over summer, they're supposed to be merging come March into one new entity, Aotearoa New Zealand Public Media. So yeah, very, very weird. So a lot of the time for the session was taken up with the introductory remarks by both of the chairs. So RNZ's Jim Mather defended RNZ's record over the past year under difficult circumstances and, even facing a bit of hostility and lack of trust in the media and so on. Backed the Aotearoa New Zealand Public Media plan, such as it is, and insisted that it would actually improve the wider media ecosystem and industry when, as we've heard, a lot of people in that industry are talking against the merger, are saying the reverse would be true for them. And then TVNZ's chair, Andy Coop, told the committee in no uncertain terms he believed TVNZ was sound as a business. They just had their biggest month ever of digital revenue, still delivering high-rating shows and increasing listenership of the on-demand platform TVNZ Plus. And he also reiterated his support for Aotearoa New Zealand Public Media, the merger plan, but you would have to do that, wouldn't you, as chair of an organisation who is, answerable to the shareholding ministers, who are part of the government.
Were there any difficult questions from MPs?
Yes, and there were. When it came time for questions, of which there was not much, but a very blunt one for TVNZ's Simon Power, the chief executive. And this came from the National Party Broadcasting and Media spokesperson, Melissa Lee.
Did TVNZ get a heads up yesterday from MCH that the merger is most likely off?
No, we did not.
What?
Yeah, yes. So that was her saying, is it true that the Ministry for Culture and Heritage, which is overseeing this whole plan, gave you a heads up that the merger is off? And Simon Power just said flat out, no, we didn't. So I don't know quite why she asked that question. But the chief executive of TVNZ, Simon Power, was also asked by Melissa Lee, another curly one. She said there was a survey done of TVNZ staff which showed that around half of them didn't see themselves working for the company in a few years. And so that was slightly awkward. But then she followed up, Melissa Lee, with a question about something like, if I heard it correctly, about $20,000 worth of RNZ sort of merchandise or promotional stuff involving teddy bears. I'm not actually sure what this is, but some sort of gimmicks that at some point RNZ might have produced. And RNZ Chief Executive Paul Thompson, pointed that out. This was a relatively small-scale thing, and actually done long before the public media merger was an issue. But the tone of Melissa Lee's question was, do you care about this stuff more than you do about creating content efficiently for New Zealanders? And so, not really a major issue in, short time for questions. And at the end of the whole thing, she had more supplementary questions she wanted to ask, which there was literally no time for her other than to ask the question and for then the committee to say, look, we'll try and get a written answer to that later down the track. So, yeah, not a particularly effectively run meeting, I'm afraid.
I haven't seen any teddy bears lounging about the place.
No, I hope someone can fill me in, because it completely took me by surprise. But the point is, it was a small amount of money. It was some promotional project, not a huge deal, and really not worth spending a whole lot of time. And what's meant to be, not just members of Parliament. It's meant to be members of Parliament on our behalf as a parliamentary committee, analysing the performance over the past year of these two state-owned assets. Not just trying to make points about that might be in the end kind of party political about the merger or the performance of the two entities.
Mind you, 20k could go a long way around the place. Did the committee's scrutiny help shed light on the state of the broadcasters in the shape that we're all in for the future?
Well, that was the problem. There wasn't a whole lot left for that. There were some questions about things like how they handle disinformation. Very specific one about a Green Party MP asked about ethnic pay gaps and so on, and the ethnic balance of shows that are commissioned, inclusivity and policies like that. Paul Thompson actually said at one point that they were examining news teams in Hindi, Chinese and Mandarin languages at RNZ, which was also a new thing, and the committee hadn't heard about that before. But here's another example of a question that was kind of a waste of time, really, and this is ACT MP Damien Smith. He wanted to ask about the Prime Minister. She made some recent comments in media interviews about why the public media plan was being put in place, where she hinted that RNZ could at some point in the future collapse. There was some prospect of that happening. And so he asked this question, and the committee chair, Angie Warren-Clark, then stepped in on that like this.
Under a national-led government, this time next Christmas, this merger should be gone. Can you...
Damien, I'd just like to remind you we are discussing the annual review, which is a retrospective view.
The problem was that the last review in February was a bit like this too, in front of the same committee, not the exact same mix of MPs or members of that committee that time though. But it is a bit disappointing because, like I said, it is them as parliamentarians supposed to be checking out how these outfits have done. After every annual review, there's a lot of written questions too, so there's a lot to go through, and a written report, which you would at the very least hope that the members would read and then bring up to what progress has been made in this last year. And I didn't hear very much of that at all. And it was a bit different 2 years ago when it was straight after that RNZ Concert Youth Network controversy. And then RNZ in their review particularly were faced some very detailed questions, and that was all put down in the report as things that ought to be followed up. And the next year they just kind of weren't. So a bit disappointing. I mean, MPs, to be fair, have a lot of committees all through the day. I think about 5 minutes after this one, they were then doing the review of the new Ethnic Communities Ministry. So, they've got a lot of tracks they've got to switch between. But, at the least I would have thought that reports written by the previous committee would be read, acted on and followed up, and that really didn't happen today.
Now, you want to fill us in on reports of road rage?
Yes, or actually road devastation even. So clearly not the top news story of the day or media issue of the week, but this News Hub at 6 introduction to a news item on Sunday did get me going a bit.
Dozens of motorists have been left devastated after getting caught up in a botched road repair north of Auckland. It took place on State Highway 1 between Warkworth and Wellsford. Lauren Hendrickson has the story. So
that was the Dome Valley with those road repairs. I think this has been fairly widely reported. Some more than 40 cars, the story said, had gone into this tar seal that wasn't well done and ended up peeling off onto the tyres of the cars. But in that story, one single motorist told News Hub he was shocked, stunned and devastated. You feel as if your car has been destroyed, he said, and obviously not great for him, but I feel that line of dozens of devastated motorists was a bit overstated and not really that strong a news story.
It was pretty shocking though, wasn't it? This busy section of State Highway 1 repaired so badly that it damaged cars and had to be shut down again.
Yes, sure. And, also they had to come back and repair it, redo it. So people did have to know that it was going to be closed down again. So a bit of a developing situation. But I think it was overcooked a bit by News Hub. But I did listen to Talkback Radio over the next couple of days, just bits and pieces, and heard people reporting similar sorts of things around the country that this is happening. But the thing was, the online version of that same story by News Hub, when you look at it online, it's got a completely different headline. It says, National Simeon Brown calls for compensation for motorist vehicles damaged by peeling tar. And that was all based on a pair of tweets from National's transport spokesperson. He said that Aotearoa's roads have become a joke, and he said, I hope NZTA is offering compensation to motorists who have had their vehicles damaged. But in that actual News Hub report that we heard the intro from, Laura Hendrickson, the reporter, actually had a lawyer in there saying that Waka Kotahi, NZTA as was, their failure to ensure a safe road surface meant that people were actually entitled to some compensation if their cars were damaged. And in that same report, they had Waka Kotahi telling News Hub that people could actually go to Fulton Hogan to do this. And in the online story that Laura wrote, there's full details of how to do that, who to contact and who to email at Fulton Hogan. And Fulton Hogan executive quoted in the story actually says, yeah, it's our responsibility. People should get in touch. We'll do it. So why would you headline your story on an opposition politician urging Waka Kotahi to pay out of the public purse? Because it's just not necessary in an act of kind of political grandstanding as well. But I mean, in the end, just like the wrong angle. And I just thought that was strange.
It's not the only news story about chip seal angst that you've seen this week.
No, complete coincidence, but there's another weird one, the Dominion Post. This is about roads actually quite close to where I live in Wellington. People in the Crofton Downs neighbourhood were reported as being angry about their roads being fixed. And
normally people want their roads to be fixed, don't they?
Yes. So what I reckon this is actually, this isn't road rage, this is road repair rage. They're actually cross about it. So this story had pictures of residents, standing in the road, looking cross, not quite doing the arms folded thing, but not far off, and saying they were dumbfounded when they heard heavy machinery turning up in their road to start working on it. Actually, there's a quote here, I'll read to you. John Boyd was aghast, as were several of his neighbours. I actually think it's good to do prudential anticipatory maintenance of key infrastructure, but the people in Spencer Street were looking at the existing seal and asking, WTF?
Was it actually quoted WTF?
WTF, yeah. So you probably said it politely. But the story had the council explaining, this is routine 10-year maintenance. We wait 10 years, we go around, we repair the roads. But the residents were saying, the road's fine, you don't need to do this. And it turned out what they were angry about was chip seal, because they didn't want that rough, stony stuff. Because I think they had that flat, kind of nice bitumen. And one guy can actually relate to this. One guy, Cyrus Free, is his name, another resident of the street, saying the chip seal had been sticking to their car tyres and damaged them. But he said he biked to work every day, and he said every time he rode over this new chip seal, he felt like he was going to have a flat tyre. So I can relate to that as someone who rides a bike. So in the end, I did actually learn a bit from the story about how and why the council decides at some places to do that flat bitumen and in other places to do that stone set chip seal, which is less popular and with motorists and a bit more noisy. So in the end, I did learn, and I had no idea that you could, if your car got damaged by a poor road repair, that you could actually go and get compensation from it if you could identify the right place to go.
I saw that one picture anyway. It did look pretty bad. The whole
the guy with the stick trying to prise the... Yeah. But I have a suspicion that because the weather's been so bad, there's been a lot of wet weather, then now there's going to be a lot of hot weather. And I have a feeling that if there's not much going on over summer, this could be this summer. This is like the shark story of... the silly season. We're going to be seeing us all over the country, people standing by appalling potholes and dodgy rushed road repairs as the sort of weird and variable hot wet weather undermines it. That's my prediction for the summer. Could be wrong, but there we go.
Oh, I hope not. I really don't. I do. We don't need that, especially, having a holiday and then there's massive potholes and tar all over your car.
Yeah, I'll come back for Mediawatch in the new year. You can hear my road repair rage special.
Colin, last time we spoke, you talked about the Football World Cup and whether media would focus on the human rights aspects of Qatar once the football got underway. The death of a journalist who was raising those issues really stunned the press pool there, obviously.
Yeah, and this is a guy called Grant Wall. He made his name at Sports Illustrated magazine, which I think is a big deal in America, but not perhaps so much around the world. But yeah, he actually died during the weekend's Holland-Argentina game, a thrilling game. He must have died quite close to the end because he was tweeting about this extraordinary equalising free kick that the Dutch did that anyone who follows the game would have seen. Amazing moment. Yeah, he died, fell in the press box and died soon after. But he was one of the very few who has stuck with that issue of critiquing the World Cup, the organisation, highlighting the thousands of deaths and the mistreatment of migrant workers that went into the building of the tournament. In a recent article, he said they just don't care. Another worker died during the tournament, and it was barely mentioned. He said the Qatari World Cup organisers don't even hide their apathy over this. And days earlier, before he died, he'd been detained and interrogated at a game because he went in a shirt with a head of soccer ball surrounded by a rainbow. So that was a challenge to, Qatar's laws on LGBTQ plus people and their lack of rights in Qatar. So he was one of very few who was prepared to sort of go all out and keep raising these issues even during the tournament. And a few days ago, he was on podcast just saying that he'd been ill and been to a clinic. He was getting bronchitis and a bit burned out. But yeah, a couple of days later, he actually died. And his brother is kind of alleging foul play, but I think the body is now back in the States and there'll be an autopsy. So if there's anything untoward, I guess we'd find out through that. But it just seems like a very, very sad story at this stage.
Very sad. What marked him out as a special journalist?
Well, he decided to concentrate entirely on soccer, which was kind of an unusual move because he's most famous about 20 years ago. He did a front page Sports Illustrated one on LeBron James, who was then in high school, and picked him out as one to watch. So that turned out to be a good pick. But just I've heard all these podcasts because I'm interested in the World Cup and football. And a lot of them began, even in a sensational week of World Cup action, began with tributes to Grant Wall before they talked about any game. They all seemed to know him. Everybody seemed to like him. They said he would go on anyone's podcast or recording or help. Never asked for any money. Just seemed like one of these people who everybody admired and got on with, and is absolutely shocked that he died at a young age. I mean, he also did one thing unusual because he researched FIFA corruption, because there was a lot going on in the North American area, which ended up being important. He once actually tried to run for the presidency of FIFA himself in a bid to highlight the corruption that was going on in the organisation. So, yeah, kind of a journalist prepared to walk the talk, it seems.
Well, as to the game itself, the beautiful game, just the final to go now on Monday. So it looks like the thrills and shocks on the pitch have overshadowed the human rights stuff.
Yeah, in fact, there is one more semi-final tomorrow. That's France-Morocco, and then we'll know who plays Argentina in that final on Monday. But that definitely has overshadowed it. So apart from Grant Wall, there was one exception I'd name. This is Miguel Delaney, who's a sort of Irish-Spanish journalist, but he writes for The Independent in the UK, and he wrote a piece at the start of the World Cup, and then he wrote a follow-up this week saying, "Are you enjoying the Qatar World Cup? Well, here is the reality hiding in plain sight." And one line really stood out when he talked about the lack of rights for migrant workers and so on who've done so much of the work to actually get this tournament running. He said, when people say to me that these migrant workers seem to be happy and polite and nice during the World Cup when you meet them, he said, it's their job. If there's any kind of dissent, it won't be tolerated. And he wrote this, he said, there are moments when it's difficult not to think that this is what elements of the American Deep South must have been like during slavery, an underclass of people overlooked but simultaneously taken for granted. And yet they underpin absolutely everything in the state of Qatar. And he said this world shouldn't exist in 2022 and not. It isn't one that a World Cup should be rewarding.
Yeah, very true. The World Cup can create controversies and grudges that last for decades, not centuries, like Maradona's famous Hand of God illegal goal, and that's still being highlighted in the media nearly 40 years later. Anything like that this time?
Well, a lot less. I mean, there was one incident in a Japan match where the ball, to all money, appeared to be out of play, and the goal that resulted from it was crucial in knocking out, I think, Germany, if I've got that right. Been too many games. But, now we've got all this technology. We've got video-assisted refereeing. We've got GPS technology that they're doing offsides now, where you see the sort of AI rendering of whether a player's offside by a fraction. It's quite amazing. And on the Weekend Sports Show on Sunday on ZB, Jason Pine, who's a bit of a football freak, he got an Aussie expert on the line who's helped develop this tech, and it just made me realise, talking to Professor Robert Orkey was his name, just how much they're tracking players. It's almost like the kind of ultimate form of surveillance.
We call it skeletal tracking, where they effectively track 20 plus different points on the body, and of course in football it's the scoring points of the body. So anything, of course, as you know, apart from the T-shirt line down on the arms is a scoring part of the body. So they need to be able to track that accurately on every player on the pitch, attacking and defending players in real time, and also the location of the ball. So it's a very complex undertaking.
It sounds it. Is the tech good for the TV coverage and the billions of fans worldwide watching? Does it make it more compelling, do you reckon?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, it might be weird for the players, they ever stop to think about this, how many hundreds of points on their body are literally being tracked as they run around the pitch. But it sucks for the fans in the stands, though, because when they do these calls with the VAR technology and halt the game to look at it frame by frame, in a truck somewhere with hundreds of video monitors and then tell the ref what to do, they have really no idea. They see a screen that says a decision pending. But yeah, for the viewer at home, it is quite compelling because you do get to see the replays. But it does relieve the pressure on referees to make these potentially game-changing mistakes. So that is the main thing. But one thing that Professor Orkey also told Jason Pine was that this stuff, the machines could take over basically, and we could end up with a kind of robo-refereeing.
There's companies around the world, instead of having, say, 20 points on the body that they're actually measuring, they're looking at effectively 1,000 or more, or 10,000 points on the body that they can be looking at simultaneously. So it's really, I think that we get to the point where there's potential for some automatic refereeing decisions to be made.
Yeah, but if that actually happens, I do want an actual upright, robot on the field. I want to see the players enraged, encircling the robot, shouting at it. I don't want it just to be a sort of screen somewhere else and an announcement over a tannoy if we are to have robo-refereeing.
Yeah, that is yet to come. Well, we spoke about tributes for the American journalist Grant Wall, but tributes also this week for a journalist closer to home.
Yes, long-serving New Zealand Herald political journalist and commentator John Armstrong. He died this week. He was an officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit, I think 2016 he was given that award. He was only 68 when he died, but he'd worked and endured many years with Parkinson's disease, but carried on working for, I believe, more than 20 years after it first became acute. He used to contribute to things like the panel on RNZ, and it affected his speech and mobility, but didn't stop him working and sharing his wisdom about things. And most recently, TVNZ was using him as an online commentator and an analyst. But lots of journalists reacting this week to his death across different generations, let's say, which just show how long he was in the game, and so many saying he was a great mentor and advisor, and reacting with real sadness to his death in social media in a couple of the obits that have been published.
And what about you? Did you know him, or maybe you annoyed him on Mediawatch?
No, I didn't know him, and I don't know whether I annoyed him, but I don't remember this very clearly. It was a long time ago, but he did ring me up once to tell me that I'd done something about the coverage of a political story, which he thought I'd sort of fundamentally misunderstood the realities of either that story or how it worked in the gallery. And he was very polite and not patronising, and kind of invited me to come over and actually talk about it, and he could tell me a few things about the gallery and how they work, and I didn't take up the offer at the time. I probably should have. But one other thing that I'd like to mention is that he stuck up for Nicky Hager when a lot of other journalists were kind of slightly indifferent to the fact that he was under attack from where he was being surveilled and by the SIS and police and so on, and has had to go fight very long legal battles over that. John Key was calling I think it was a screaming left-wing conspiracy theorist, things like this, after his lid-lifting books came out. But after The Hollow Men and Dirty Politics, which kind of lifted the lid as well on the way the media interacted, attack bloggers and so on, because they were sources of juicy stories. John Armstrong said the revelations in Dirty Politics were the closest we'd had to a New Zealand Watergate, and Hager's book does go to the heart of government. He said no one has ever produced the evidence to question the veracity of the content of Hager's books. In short, he is credible. And I think it was good of him to do that at the time, because, yes, he was a bit of an outsider for other journalists, in mainstream media, particularly writing about politics, who weren't quite sure what they made of Nicky Hager. But, John read the books, knew the context, and was prepared to make that judgment in public.
And what have people said about his own contribution to journalism?
Well, one former editor of his was Gavin Ellis at the Herald. Previously, he said John always knew the difference between comment and analysis, which is pretty important these days. He eschewed the former and carried out the latter with intelligence, fairness, and a deep understanding of the workings of democracy, said Gavin Ellis. And then the next editor at the Herald after Gavin was Tim Murphy, who's now a co-editor at Newsroom. And he wrote a quite long and quite personal piece, saying there have been many journalists who've had substantial longevity writing on our politics, many brave columnists calling things as they see them, but he was one of actual great erudition, trusted and well regarded by much of the political spectrum. And I like the way Tim wrote this. He said, John guided us through an era that spanned Merv Wellington to Mojo Mathers, Bill Ralston to Paddy Gower, and Winston Peters through to Winston Peters. And as an aside, Tim says John was always right about Peters, saying in a farewell column, Peters' career was material for some kind of Shakespearean tragedy or the psychologist's couch, or both. And Winston Peters himself on social media has honoured John, said John will always be remembered as a distinguished journalist who articulated both sides of a story without personal influence, allowed the reader to decide the merits of a political position, and his longevity was testament to his dedication and professionalism, and he will be missed, says Winston Peters.
Oh, it's a great tribute. And finally, Colin, you heard a seasoned journalist telling the PM what to read over the summer. I
happened to be listening to News Talk ZB. Patrick Smelly came on and started talking to Heather Duplessis-Allen on the Drive Show about a summer reading list for Jacinda Ardern. So it turns out this is something that's done by the New Zealand Institute of Economic Research, and this year a business desk is involved with it. But I think it appeared to take the concept of it, a summer reading list for the PM, also appeared to take Heather Duplessis-Allen by surprise.
Geez, this feels patronising. Is it meant to be?
It's something I've been doing for a few years now. Business Desk is sponsoring it this year, so that's why I've taken the opportunity to talk about it. There are 6 titles here. The likelihood that the Prime Minister will read all, let alone any of them, is probably fairly low, but it's intended to be an interesting and thought-provoking set of titles which runs across a bunch of things,
So who's actually telling the Prime Minister what she should be reading over the summer?
Yeah, well, it is the New Zealand Institute of Economic Research, which, as I now discover, has been doing this every year for a few years. The McGuinness Institute also has a similar thing, or it might even be part of the same project. They couched it as sort of public good thing. And there are a bunch of journalists that went into the selection of this particular list. There was Mickey Forbes was one, the tech writer Peter Griffin, I think, was the chair of this particular panel, and Patrick himself and a couple of staffers, I think, from that New Zealand Institute of Economic Research. But it just still seems to me to be a rather heavy-handed thing to do. So, time off for the Prime Minister. Here are weighty tomes you must read in your, short time off before coming back to lead the country.
What's on the list then?
Right. I'm going to go and have to find it now. But here we go. So there's a range of titles, but actually this was the one that Patrick Smelly himself picked out as the kind of main highlight.
But the book I wanted to talk about most today was one called The End of the World is Just the Beginning, since it's the business hour. This is by an American guy called Peter Zion. It's probably not a book that's going to cheer you up, because basically the sell is 2009 was the last great year for the world. Basically, it's saying countries are going to have to make their own goods, grow their own food, secure their own energy, fight their own battles.
That doesn't sound very escapist to me.
No, I know, doesn't it? I mean, in fact, in the statement, they had a release function of some sort and put out the statement. So the NZIER Chief Executive, Jason Shoebridge, is quoted in the statement saying, the Institute supports New Zealanders taking time over summer to read and discuss important issues. The list was prepared as part of the public good program of the NZIER, promoting better understanding of our important economic challenges, etc. So, Patrick seems to think it's a good idea, but it just, I don't know, my feeling is, if you think it would be a good idea to persuade New Zealanders or interested people, here's a bunch of our selections, here's 6 books you might want to consider reading if you've got the time, but to sort of sheet it home to the Prime Minister feels a little bit over the top to me. The other books actually on the list, there's one called Data Story, Explain Data and Inspire Action Through Story by Nancy Duarte, one called Not Now, Not Ever, 10 Years On from the Misogyny Speech of Julia Gillard, which might be interesting for political types. How to Loiter in a Turf War by Coco Solid, a.k.a. Jessica Hansel, which is an interesting one. And also Monty Sutar, the military historian's written, I think it's a novel called Kawai for Such a Time as This, vividly conjuring a vision of pre-colonial Māori society. It is quite a range of books. They do sound interesting, but just feel that the Prime Minister might feel a bit put upon being told to use her summer break to read these.
Especially on the beach.
Yeah.
All right, Colin, thank you very much. Will you be back next week?
I think it's one with Roy Hayden next week. It'll be his go. And we'll be doing we've got one last program on Sunday for the year. We'll do our traditional sort of wrap up, mash up and look back on the year.
Oh, that's good night and Happy New Year, Merry Christmas and all of that from us. So thank you for all your Midweek Media Watches this year.
That's no problem. But, I could come back and if Hayden comes back, I could give him a list of summer reading if you want one.
Go on then. You can tell us what it is next week. Thanks very much, Colin.
Cheers.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to you.
And you.